The sound of my daughter ripping the wedding dress I spent 6 months making was not a sound of defeat. It was a wake-up call. In front of 200 guests, she screamed and called me an old hag, but she didn't expect me to walk away without a single tear. She had no idea that the quiet click of my leather bag would be the most terrifying sound she had ever heard. 30 minutes later, the room went dead silent. That was the moment her perfect world fell apart and mine began. They say a mother's love is unconditional. They say it's a bond that can't be broken, a thread woven with care and devotion. I suppose I was naive enough to believe that. For 6 months, that belief was my entire life, woven into every stitch of lace and satin, every carefully placed bead on a dress I was making for my daughter, Sarah. A wedding dress, a masterpiece, or so I had hoped. The thought of her walking down the aisle in something made with my own 2 hands, a garment filled with all the love and pride a mother can muster, it made every late night, every pricked finger worth it. It was a tangible representation of a relationship I thought we had, a testament to a life I had devoted to her. I had always been the quiet one, the one who worked behind the scenes, never asking for recognition. Just being there was enough. When Sarah's first engagement fell apart, I was there to pick up the pieces. When her ex-fiancé left her for a much younger, more vibrant woman, I was the one who held her, who let her sob into my old, worn-out sweaters and told her she was beautiful and worthy and that her heart would heal. I cooked her meals, paid her rent, and listened to her endless rants about how unfair the world was. I was her silent rock, her steadfast port in a storm. I thought it was what a mother was supposed to do. Now, as I stood backstage at the opulent wedding venue, a place that cost more than my first 2 cars combined, I felt a familiar pang of anxiety. The dress was perfect, hanging on a mannequin draped in a sheet of fine silk. I had to admit, I was proud of my work. The lace was delicate, the beading intricate, and the satin shimmered under the stage lights. It was everything a girl could want in a wedding dress, and I had poured my heart and soul into every single detail. It was my gift to her, a final act of motherly devotion before she began her new life. A gift I had toiled over for 6 months, a labor of love that had left my hands sore and my eyes tired. The total cost was obscene, of course. The materials alone were a small fortune. But I had scrounged and saved, putting every spare penny toward making this day perfect for her. I wanted her to feel like a princess, a queen, a goddess. I just wanted her to be happy, to know that her mother would do anything for her. The wedding coordinator, a young woman with a clipped-on headset and a perpetually stressed expression, bustled past me. "Is the bride ready? We're running behind schedule," she chirped, her voice tight with urgency. "She's almost here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I smoothed the non-existent wrinkle from the silk sheet, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted this to be a moment of pure joy, a beautiful memory we could share forever. I wanted to see her face light up when she saw the dress, to see her eyes fill with tears of gratitude and love. I was a simple woman with simple hopes. I wanted to see my daughter happy. Suddenly, a whirlwind of white tulle and an enraged scream tore through the quiet backstage area. Sarah burst through the double doors, her face a mask of furious indignation. Her hair was a mess and her makeup was smudged, a streak of black running down her cheek. She was the picture of a woman on the verge of a full-blown meltdown. "What is this?" she shrieked, her eyes fixed on the dress. "What is this? It's a joke, right? A sick, pathetic joke?" My heart sank. My stomach churned. "Sarah, honey, what's wrong?" "It's the dress. I finished it. I'm so proud of it." She let out a harsh, guttural howl. Proud? Proud of what? This pathetic thing? This looks like something a grandmother would wear to a funeral. It's so old. She grabbed a handful of the delicate satin and squeezed it, her knuckles turning white. Do you think you can just show up here with this monstrosity and pretend to be a good mother after everything you've done? My mind reeled. What? What are you talking about? What have I done? Her eyes, once full of a childlike innocence, were now cold and hard. Don't play dumb, old hag. Stop pretending. You've been sabotaging me my whole life. My whole life. The dress, the failed engagement, the scholarships I didn't get. It was all you, wasn't it? Her words were a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left me breathless. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my chest. Sarah, honey, that's not true. I love you. I've always loved you. I just wanted to do something nice for you. The wedding coordinator and several bridesmaids had gathered, their faces a mix of confusion and morbid curiosity. The air was thick with tension. It was as if time had stopped, and all eyes were on me, on the scene that was unfolding. The embarrassment was a hot, scalding wave washing over me. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. My daughter, my sweet Sarah, was screaming at me in front of all these strangers, accusing me of things I couldn't even comprehend. Don't lie to me, she screamed, her voice cracking with fury. This dress is a symbol of everything that's wrong with you, your taste, your life, your pathetic existence. With a savage snarl, she ripped at the lace, tearing a jagged hole in the delicate fabric. The sound was like a scream, a high-pitched shriek of torn threads and broken dreams. I watched, horrified, as she continued her assault, ripping and tearing, the sound of fabric shredding in the silence. The dress, my masterpiece, was now a tattered, ruined mess. The beads scattered on the floor like shattered tears. My heart was a lump of lead in my chest. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. Then she said the words that would change everything. The words that would forever sever the tie between a mother and her child. You're just an old hag, and I'm tired of you pretending to be a good person. You're a fake, a liar, and this dress proves it. She spat the words at me, her face contorted with pure, unadulterated hatred. I didn't feel the tears. I didn't feel the pain. I felt nothing but a cold, hard emptiness. I looked at the ruined dress, then at my daughter, the beautiful, cruel woman she had become. I knew then that the thread was not only broken, but had been incinerated. The love, the devotion, the sacrifices, they meant nothing. This was the moment I realized I had been living a lie, not because of anything I had done, but because I had been so desperately, so blindly in love with an idea of who my daughter was that I had failed to see the reality. For a long moment, I stood there, motionless, a statue and the wreckage of my daughter's fury. The torn fabric of the dress was a silent testament to the violence of her words, a metaphor for the state of our relationship. My heart was a stone, cold and heavy in my chest. The embarrassment was a physical sensation, a burning blush that crawled up my neck and across my face. I could feel the eyes of the bridesmaids, the wedding coordinator, the caterer who was setting up a champagne flute pyramid, all of them witnesses to my public humiliation. It was a spectacle, a show, and I was the star. An aging, pathetic, old hag who had just had her life's work ripped to shreds. The irony was so potent, it was almost humorous. Here I was, a woman who had devoted her life to her family, and in return, I was being torn down by the very person I had tried to build up. I looked at Sarah. Her face was still contorted with rage, but there was something else there too. A flicker of triumph, a malicious glint in her eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just a tantrum. This was a calculated act of cruelty. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to see me break. And for a fleeting second, I considered giving her what she wanted. I could have crumpled to the floor, sobbed, and begged her to tell me what I had done to deserve this. I could have let her win. But something inside me, something I hadn't felt in a very long time, stirred. It was a tiny spark of defiance, a quiet, insistent voice that whispered, "No, not today, not ever again." I took a deep breath, and as I exhaled, I let all the pain, all the confusion, and all the hurt go. I replaced it with a glacial calm. The silence in the room was deafening. I looked at the dress, at the gaping, ugly hole where the delicate lace used to be. Then I looked back at Sarah. She was waiting, her jaw clenched, her eyes daring me to react. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. The question caught her off guard. The triumphant look on her face faltered for a second, replaced with a flicker of confusion. "What? Finished what? You don't get it, do you? You ruined everything. You've always ruined everything." I didn't dignify that with a response. Instead, I calmly walked over to the ruined dress, carefully took it off the mannequin, and folded the tattered remnants as neatly as I could. I paid no mind to the scattered beads on the floor. I placed the ruined dress gently in the corner, out of sight. I then walked to my leather satchel, a worn-out, unassuming thing I'd had for 20 years, a bag that, like me, was much more than it appeared to be. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "I have something to take care of." I could hear the whispered conversation start as I walked away. The hushed tones of, "What is she doing?" and "Is she going to fix it?" The simple answer was no. The complicated answer was that I was going to do something she never saw coming. I was done fixing things. I was done pretending. The show was over. The performance of the good mother was canceled. It was time for a new act, one where I was the main character, one where I stopped being a supporting player in everyone else's drama and started writing my own script. The wedding coordinator approached me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and sympathy. "Mrs. Evans, what are you going to do? The ceremony starts in 30 minutes. We have to do something." I opened my bag and pulled out my phone. A sense of purpose, a cold and delicious resolve coursed through my veins. "Oh, we're going to do something, darling," I said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my lips. Something, indeed. I ignored the frantic questions from the coordinator and the bewildered stares from the bridesmaids. I was no longer a mother, a victim, or an old hag. I was a woman on a mission, and that mission was to remind everyone in that room that you don't mess with a woman who has nothing left to lose. I had lost a daughter today. The one I knew, the one I loved, was gone. But in her place, a new person was born. A person who was about to show everyone what happens when you mistake a mother's kindness for weakness. The room went dead silent. The air crackled with anticipation. Everyone was waiting for me to do something, to cry, to scream, to fall apart, to be the woman they all thought they knew. But they didn't know me. Not really. I was about to show them. I was about to show my daughter. I was about to show them all. What you're about to read will leave you speechless. This is the moment I went from victim to avenger. My heart wasn't pounding. It was doing something far worse. It had stopped altogether, replaced by a vacuum of pure, unadulterated resolve. The moment Sarah's hateful words had left her lips, the world hadn't just stopped, it had shattered. The saccharine illusion of a happy family, of a devoted mother and a grateful daughter was gone, replaced by the ugly, raw truth of what lay beneath the surface. For years, I had made excuses for her behavior, for the casual cruelty, for the way she took everything I gave and acted as if it were her birthright. I told myself it was just a phase, that she was stressed, that she would eventually appreciate me. Oh, what a fool I had been. A magnificent, self-delusional fool. The ruined dress on the floor was not a tragedy. It was a revelation. It was the physical manifestation of all the emotional damage she had inflicted on me over the years. I walked toward my leather bag. the scent of old leather and a faint hint of lavender, a familiar comfort. The bag itself was nothing special, a simple, well-worn thing I'd carried for 2 decades, but it held my world. It held my hopes, my secrets, and now it held my revenge. As I unzipped the main compartment, I felt a tremor of anticipation. The bridesmaids whispered amongst themselves, their wide, mascara-smudged eyes following my every move. The wedding coordinator, her headset now looking more like a torture device, was practically vibrating with anxiety. She kept glancing at the grand hall, where 200 guests were blissfully unaware of the dramatic implosion unfolding backstage. What would they do without a bride, without a dress? I pulled out a small, black leather-bound notebook. It wasn't a diary. It was far more important than that. It was my financial ledger, a meticulously detailed account of every penny I had ever spent on Sarah. The thought of it, of the hours I had spent hunched over it, meticulously documenting every cost, now filled me with a perverse sense of satisfaction. I had thought it was a way to keep track of my budget, a frugal habit passed down from my mother. In reality, it was a record of my self-sacrifice. It was proof. Proof of every car I had bought for her, every rent payment I had made, every extravagant trip I had paid for when she needed a break. "Mrs. Evans," the coordinator whispered, her voice a desperate plea. "Please, we need to get her ready. The guests are seated." I looked up, meeting her gaze with a cold, level stare. "Then they can unseat themselves," I said, my voice as calm as a summer night, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. "I think they'll want to hear this." I opened the notebook to a page I had dog-eared months ago, a page titled Wedding Expenses. The list was long and detailed, a monument to my foolish generosity. It included the full cost of the venue, the catering, the photographer, the flowers, everything. I had taken care of it all. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. Because a mother's love, as they say, is unconditional. Or at least I thought it was. "I need a microphone," I announced, my voice carrying an authority I hadn't known I possessed. Sarah scoffed, a sneer twisting her lips. "What are you going to do, Mom? Read a poem? Get a life." I ignored her. The wedding coordinator, her mind clearly in a state of advanced panic, fumbled with her headset. "A microphone? But for what?" "For the announcement," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I'm going to tell them the truth, the whole glorious truth." This was it. The moment of reckoning. For so long, I had lived in the shadows, a silent and willing martyr. But the old me was gone, torn apart just like that wedding dress. In her place was a woman who was no longer afraid of confrontation, no longer afraid to tell the world what had happened. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to broadcast it to every last guest in that room. Let them all know what kind of daughter she truly was. Let them all see the old hag for what she was, a woman who had been taken for granted for the last time. My hands, which had been shaking with shock just moments before, were now steady. My mind, which had been a whirlwind of pain and confusion, was now razor sharp. I was no longer an old hag. I was a force of nature. And Sarah, my beautiful, cruel daughter, was about to be caught in the eye of the storm. I saw the first glimmer of fear in her eyes. It was a beautiful, satisfying thing to behold. She realized for the first time that I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to fight back. And I was going to win. She had expected a sobbing, broken woman. Instead, she had a firebrand on her hands. I was about to show her what a woman with nothing left to lose could really do. She had been so busy playing the villain that she hadn't realized she had awakened the hero. There's a lot more to this story, but this is the moment where everything changes. What happens next will not only shock you,
but also make you question everything you thought you knew about family.
The microphone. I wasn't just going to speak, I was going to broadcast. Sarah's face had gone from triumphant to a mask of pure horror. She was no longer sneering, she was gaping, her mouth hanging open as she tried to process what I was doing. She had expected tears, a breakdown, a pathetic retreat, but a public announcement? That was a level of audacity she clearly hadn't considered. I saw her groom, a handsome, well-heeled young man named Michael, step forward, his brow furrowed with confusion. He had a bewildered look on his face, as if he had just stumbled into a movie and didn't know his part. This was the moment where I was going to show him, and everyone else, who I truly was. The wedding coordinator, bless her frantic little heart, finally managed to get the microphone connected. Her hands trembled as she handed it to me. It's on a short cord," she stammered. "You'll have to stay here." "That's fine," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "This is exactly where I need to be." I clutched the microphone, its weight a surprising comfort. The sound of my own breath, amplified and echoing through the small backstage area, was the only thing I could hear. It was a moment of supreme, silent power. This was my stage now. The main hall could wait. They were about to get a show they hadn't paid for. I raised the microphone to my lips. My heart was a steady drum beating out a rhythm of quiet vengeance. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was a messy, loud emotion. This was something colder, something more precise. It was justice. My daughter, Sarah, just ripped the wedding dress I spent 6 months making for her, and she called me an old hag. The words hung in the air, a stunning pronouncement of the raw truth. A gasp rippled through the hall. I couldn't see the guests, but I could feel their presence, their collective shock. I had dropped a bombshell, and the fallout was already beginning. This was the moment where I had taken control. The narrative was no longer hers to dictate. It was mine. For years, I had been the silent, dutiful mother, the one who provided, who paid, who never asked for anything in return. But not anymore. Now, I was the one with the microphone. Now, I was the one with the spotlight. "What are you doing?" Sarah shrieked, finally snapping out of her stupor. "Stop it! You're ruining my wedding!" I gave her a saccharine, patronizing smile. "Oh, darling, you already did that. I'm just documenting the process." I took a deep breath, and I began. I didn't just tell them about the dress. I told them about everything. I told them about the car I had bought her for her 16th birthday, only to have her crash it 3 months later and then demand a new one. I told them about the college tuition I had paid for, only to find out she had dropped out after the first semester to find herself and was now living in a luxury apartment on my dime. I told them about the extravagant trips to Europe and the Caribbean that I had funded so she could bond with her friends. My words were measured, my tone was calm, and every single syllable was dripping with a quiet, devastating truth. I watched as Michael's face went from confused to pale. The bridesmaids who had been whispering a moment ago were now staring at me in horrified fascination. The wedding coordinator, her job-induced panic now replaced by pure, unadulterated awe, stood frozen in place. They were all witnesses to the slow, methodical dismantling of a carefully constructed lie. Sarah's lie. Her life, built on my sacrifices, was now being exposed brick by excruciating brick for everyone to see. "And now here we are," I said, my voice trembling with an emotion I couldn't quite name. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something else. A quiet triumph. My daughter, Sarah, just ripped the wedding dress I spent 6 months making for her, a dress I made for her out of love. Because apparently, to her, I'm just an old hag who's good for one thing: money. The silence that followed was so profound it was almost holy. It was the silence of a truth bomb landing, of a lie being exposed and a crowd of people realizing they had been a part of a charade. The air, which had been thick with tension, was now thick with an even more powerful emotion: shock. I could feel their collective gaze on me, not with pity, but with a newfound respect. They were no longer seeing a victim.
They were seeing a survivor, a woman who was not afraid to stand up for herself, to demand respect, and to expose the truth no matter how ugly. I looked at my daughter, her face a mixture of fury and mortification. She had a choice to make. She could try to deny it, to lie, but the evidence, the torn dress, was right there. Or she could admit the truth that would forever brand her as the spoiled, selfish child she was. I knew which choice she would make, and I knew what the consequences would be. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something that I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of peace. My dear readers, you're about to witness the moment where everything falls apart. The truth is out, but the story isn't over. What happens next will change the course of not just my life, but everyone in that room. You won't want to miss it.
The air in the backstage area was so thick with tension, you could practically see it shimmer. My voice, having delivered its devastating pronouncement, had left a vacuum of silence in its wake. All eyes were on me, then on Sarah, then back to me again. The bridesmaids had taken a collective step back, as if I were a live wire, and Sarah was a fuse box they no longer wanted to be near. Michael, the bewildered groom, finally found his voice. "Sarah," he said, his tone low and dangerous. "What is she talking about?" Sarah, her face a fiery red of 1,000 suns, looked at me with pure, unadulterated venom. "She's lying. She's making it all up. She's just jealous. She's always hated me. She's a terrible person, a bitter old hag who wants to ruin my happiness." Her voice was a high-pitched shriek, a desperate attempt to drown out the truth with noise and vitriol. But it was too late. The words had already been said. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was already growing into a thorny, ugly bush. I just stood there, holding the microphone, a small, knowing smile on my face. Her denials were proof. Her desperation was a confirmation of everything I had said. There was no longer a need to speak. I had already won. The silence was my victory lap. Michael, however, was not convinced. He turned to Sarah, his face a mask of disappointment. "Is it true?" he demanded. "Did she pay for all of this? The venue? The cars? Is this all on her?" Sarah's defiance crumbled. She glanced from Michael to me, then to the silent, watching crowd of bridesmaids. There was no escape. She had been trapped by her own deceit. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The jig was up. The carefully constructed lie, the one that had held her life together for so long, had finally collapsed. She was just a spoiled child who had never grown up. She had mistaken my love for a bottomless well, and now the well was dry. "I can't believe this," Michael said, shaking his head. "You told me you were paying for everything, that you had a trust fund. You said you were an independent woman." The betrayal was evident in his voice. He had been so blind, so trusting. He had believed her, just as I had for so many years. I felt a flicker of pity for him, but it was quickly extinguished by a cold, hard resolve. He was just a collateral casualty in a war that had been brewing for years. "It's just money," Sarah wailed, tears finally streaming down her face. "It's just money, Michael. We're getting married. Who cares about money?" "I care," he yelled back, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "I care about the lies. I care that you've been living a lie this entire time. I care that you treated your mother like that." He gestured to the tattered remains of the dress, a silent testament to her cruelty. "I don't know who you are." His words hit her harder than any of my accusations. She went from furious to pathetic, her body collapsing in on itself. She looked at me, not with hatred, but with a new, terrifying emotion, fear. She was afraid of losing him. She was afraid of losing everything. And it was all because of me.
The thought was a powerful intoxicant, a high more potent than any drug. I had broken her, not with violence, but with a simple, quiet truth. Just then, a commotion at the entrance to the backstage area drew our attention. The venue owner, a burly, mustachioed man named Frank, was standing there, his face a thundercloud of fury. "What in the Sam Hill is going on here?" he boomed, his voice shaking the rafters. "The guests are demanding to know what's going on. The caterers are threatening to leave. The band just packed up their instruments. My wedding is being ruined." "This isn't your wedding, Frank," I said, a dangerous glint in my eyes. "My daughter's wedding, which I paid for, every single penny, and now it's canceled." Frank's mustache twitched. "Canceled? You can't just cancel a wedding." "Watch me," I said, a cold smile spreading across my lips. I pulled out my cell phone and made a quick call. A moment later, my lawyer's voice came through. I put it on speakerphone so everyone could hear. "Paul, I'm at the Bella Donna Grand. I need you to inform the venue owner that the contract is null and void. The wedding is canceled, effective immediately." The silence in the room was absolute. Frank's face had gone from red to white. Sarah's had gone from white to a sickly shade of green. Michael was just staring at me, a newfound respect in his eyes. I was no longer the quiet, unassuming mother. I was a force to be reckoned with, and I was just getting started. This was a long time coming. This was years of abuse, of being taken for granted, of being treated like a doormat, all coming to a head in one spectacular moment of glorious public vengeance. The Bella Donna Grand. The name was so pretentious. It was fitting that a place with such an ostentatious name would be the backdrop for a spectacle of such epic proportions. The irony was not lost on me. No, how the other half lives, and then dies on the vine of their own greed and lies. The truth in this instance was not just setting me free, it was setting fire to everything around me.
Frank, the venue owner, looked at me as if I had just sprouted a second head and announced my intention to fly to the moon without a rocket. His mouth hung open, a silent O of disbelief. He started to stammer, A contract? You can't just—" But my lawyer's voice, clear and crisp through my phone speaker, cut him off. "Mr. Evans is correct," the disembodied voice of Paul stated. "The contract contains a clause regarding material misrepresentation on the part of the contracting parties. Given the circumstances and the public confession of financial fraud and emotional abuse, we consider the contract null and void. We will be sending over the official documentation within the hour. Good day." The call ended, leaving a profound silence in its wake. Frank's face was a study in changing emotions, from confusion to rage to a dawning, terrible realization. You paid for all of this?" he asked, his booming voice reduced to a shocked whisper. He was no longer looking at Sarah, the beautiful, wronged bride, but at me, the old hag who had just yanked the financial rug out from under his meticulously planned wedding. Every last cent, I confirmed, my gaze unwavering. The power that coursed through me was electric. It was the heady, intoxicating feeling of a woman who had been taken for granted for so long, finally showing her true strength. I looked at Sarah, who was now sobbing uncontrollably, not with sorrow, but with the frustration of a spoiled child denied her favorite toy. The tears weren't for the ruined dress or the broken family bond. They were for the loss of a life she felt she was owed, a life I had foolishly been subsidizing. The sight of her, a beautiful and cruel young woman, reduced to a pathetic weeping mess, was a chilling but deeply satisfying tableau. She had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my quiet nature for a lack of a backbone. She had no idea she was messing with a woman who had spent a lifetime learning to pick her battles, and who, when she finally chose one, would fight it to the very end. Michael, Sarah's fiancé, stood there, pale as a ghost, watching the scene unfold.
His eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of something new there. It wasn't pity. It was awe, a silent, dawning respect for the woman who had just brought her fiancé's carefully constructed world to a screeching halt. He hadn't just lost a bride, he had lost an illusion. The woman he thought he knew, the one with the trust fund and the independent spirit, was a fraud, and I had just exposed her in the most public and humiliating way possible. This wasn't just a wedding drama. This was the entire foundation of his future crumbling before his very eyes. A life he had planned, based on a lie, was now in shambles. A part of me felt a flicker of pity for him. He was, in many ways, an innocent bystander. But another, more cynical part of me knew that he had been so blind because he had chosen to be. He was so taken with the image Sarah presented that he never bothered to look for the person beneath it. He hadn't noticed the red flags, the casual disdain she showed for me, the way she spoke about her family. He had been a willing participant in his own deception. Just then, a wave of noise from the main hall reached our ears. The guests, who had been murmuring and whispering, were now getting restless. The silence from the stage, which they had initially taken as a technical glitch, was now stretching into an uncomfortable silence. They were waiting for the bride to appear, for the music to start, for the ceremony to begin. Little did they know that the ceremony they had come to see was over before it even started. The real show, the one they were witnessing now, was far more dramatic and far more revealing. "I need to inform them," I said, my voice cutting through the remaining tension. I handed the microphone back to the bewildered coordinator. "You need to announce that the wedding has been called off, and you can tell them why. Every last detail." The coordinator's face went white. I can't. My job." "Your job is to do what the client says, and I am the client, or rather, I was. Tell them the truth. Tell them what the bride did to her mother. Tell them about the dress. Tell them that a woman's love was just used as a credit card. Tell them everything, or I will." She looked at me for a long moment, a silent plea in her eyes, but she knew I wasn't bluffing. She knew that I was a woman with nothing left to lose. I had already lost my daughter. What was a little public shame to a woman who had just had her heart ripped out? She took a deep breath, her hands shaking, and turned to face the main hall. I watched her go, a small, triumphant smile on my face. This was my moment. This was the moment I had been waiting for my entire life without even realizing it. The moment I stopped being a supporting character in everyone else's life and became the main character of my own. I had let them walk all over me, trample my heart and my soul, but not anymore. This was my stand. This was my public declaration that I was done. I was done with the lies. I was done with the deceit. I was done with the parasitic relationship that had been draining me for so long. The guests were about to hear a story they wouldn't soon forget. They would no longer see the perfect, glowing bride and her charming groom. They would see a spoiled and selfish woman and the long-suffering mother who had finally had enough. I knew the whispers and the gossip would be relentless, but I didn't care. The truth was out there, and that was all that mattered. Sarah had no idea what was coming next. The public humiliation was just the appetizer. The main course, the real consequences of her actions, was still to come. I had a feeling her future was about to look a whole lot different than she had planned. And if they thought this was the end of the drama, they were mistaken. This was just the beginning. The real story, the one with the lasting consequences, was just starting to unfold. They would be glued to the seats of their cars, listening to every last detail, every single twist and turn. They wouldn't want to miss a single second.
The chaos in the main hall was a symphony of glorious discord. The sound of the microphone's feedback and the wedding coordinator's trembling voice announcing the cancellation of the wedding rippled through the air, followed by a collective gasp that was so loud it sounded like a single monstrous exhalation.
100 different conversations exploded at once, a cacophony of questions and accusations. Chairs scraped against the polished floor as guests rose from their seats, craned their necks, and pointed towards the stage where the coordinator stood, a terrified deer in the headlights. The string quartet, which had been playing a lovely, gentle melody, came to an abrupt, screeching halt. The silence that followed was even more deafening than the noise. It was a silence of disbelief, of shock, of 1,000 confused minds trying to process the impossible. I watched it all unfold from the backstage area, my vantage point a secret balcony seat to the most dramatic production of my life. Sarah, no longer a sobbing mess, had gone rigid with rage. She stared at the closed doors leading to the main hall, her face a mask of furious mortification. Michael, her groom, was looking at me, then at her, his face a complex roadmap of betrayal and confusion. "You told them," he whispered, his voice a broken thing. "Someone had to," I said, a shrug in my voice that I didn't feel. I felt a cold, hard satisfaction. This was the moment she had lost all control. The narrative was no longer hers to twist and shape. It was out in the open, a raw, ugly truth for everyone to see. She had spent a lifetime building a facade of perfection, a delicate house of cards built on my silent support, and I had just blown it all down with a single breath. The silence that had descended in the hall was the sound of her world collapsing, and it was a beautiful sound. "How could you do this to me?" she shrieked, finally turning on me, her eyes wild. "On my wedding day! My wedding day!" "It was never about your wedding day, Sarah. It was about your life, the one you tried to build on a foundation of lies and deceit. I was just the unfortunate contractor who had to come in and point out the faulty wiring." My sarcasm was a finely honed blade, and I could see it cutting deep. Michael, to his credit, didn't just stand there. He walked over to the backstage entrance, his hands on his hips, and peered out into the hall. He was met with 100 inquisitive stares. A distant relative, a woman I had never met but who had the kind of face that belonged on a church bake sale poster, came marching toward him, her face a storm cloud. "Michael, what is going on? Your fiancé's mother just announced the wedding is off." He recoiled as if she had slapped him. He turned back to us, his face a mixture of pure terror and profound embarrassment. He was trapped between a furious mother-in-law-to-be, a hysterical fiancé, and a very public spectacle. The silent triumph I felt was almost overwhelming. This wasn't about him, but he was getting a front-row seat to the consequences of getting involved with a woman like Sarah. He had made his bed, now he had to lie in it. "I need to leave," he said, his voice a tremor. I can't do this." He looked at Sarah, and for a moment I saw a flash of the pain he must be feeling. He had been a part of her life for 2 years, planning a future that had just been revealed to be a complete sham. He hadn't just lost a fiancé, he had lost a future. He had lost everything he thought he had. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt a flicker of pity for him. He was a victim, yes, but a victim who had chosen to ignore all the signs. The way she had always made me pay for things when he was around. The way she had always downplayed my role in her life. The way she had constantly complained about me to him. He had chosen to believe her. Sarah's hysterical sobbing was no longer just about the wedding. It was about the man she was losing. She grabbed Michael's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his skin. "No, Michael, wait. It's not true. She's lying. She's crazy." He didn't pull away from her, but he didn't lean in either. He just stood there, his face a blank mask. He looked at me, his eyes full of questions, but I had no answers for him. My part of the story was over. The rest was up to him. He had to decide if he was going to stand by a woman who had lied to him, who had treated her own mother so cruelly, or if he was going to walk away from the mess she had created. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. This wasn't just a moment of emotional reckoning. It was the entire future of two people hanging in the balance, a tightrope walk over a chasm of lies and deceit. The wedding coordinator, bless her soul, came back, her face a pale shade of green. "Chief Frank Hotel is calling the police if you all don't leave," she whispered to me, her voice a desperate plea. I just smiled. Let him. I have a feeling the police will want to talk to Sarah about the destruction of personal property. I gestured to the tattered remains of the dress that lay in a pathetic pile on the floor. It was no longer a symbol of my love. It was a crime scene. The irony was so perfect, so deliciously poetic that I almost laughed. They all had to be wondering what I was thinking, why I was so calm, so in control. They had no idea that I had been preparing for this moment my entire life. Not consciously, of course, but every time I had chosen to stay silent, every time I had let her get away with something, I was building up to this. This was the culmination of years of quiet resentment, of suppressed fury, and it felt glorious. You think you know what happens next. You think this is the end. Oh, my dear sweet readers, you have no idea. This is just the beginning of the storm. The public humiliation was the first act. The real drama, the one that will have them on the edge of their seats, is still to come. You won't want to miss a single moment of this glorious unraveling.
The threat of police intervention, rather than instilling fear, was a tonic to my frayed nerves. Let them come. Let them see the situation for what it was. Let them see the wreckage of my love, the ruined dress, and the petulant fury of a woman-child who had just realized that her endless gravy train had derailed. I stood there, arms crossed, a quiet storm of vindication and a cool sense of purpose. Frank, the venue manager, was a caricature of a man on the verge of a full-blown aneurysm. He fumbled with his phone, his big, meaty fingers shaking as he dialed. His face, once so ruddy and proud, was now a sickly shade of purple. The show was about to get a new cast of characters, and I couldn't have been more thrilled. The climax of this dramatic farce was unfolding just as I had envisioned. Sarah, sensing a shift in the power dynamic, a new threat on the horizon, stopped her theatrical sobbing and glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You're going to get me arrested? My own mother?" she spat, the sound of her voice a raw, ugly thing. "Not arrested, darling," I said, a dangerous calm in my voice, "just held accountable." I looked at the dress, a pathetic heap of torn fabric on the floor. That's a designer dress, a one-of-a-kind. It's an investment, a piece of art, and you destroyed it in a fit of rage. That, my dear, is called a felony. The lie was as good as the truth, and I knew that in this moment the truth was whatever I said it was. The look on her face, a mixture of panic and disbelief, was priceless. She had never had to face the consequences of her actions, never. Every tantrum, every broken thing, every reckless expense had been swept under the rug and paid for by me. But not today. Today, the bill was coming due. It wasn't long before the flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser painted a surreal tableau on the window of the backstage room. Two officers, a young woman with a crisp, professional demeanor, and a grizzled veteran with a tired, world-weary expression, entered the room. They looked from the sobbing, disheveled bride to the pale, shaking groom, to the bewildered wedding staff, and finally their eyes landed on me. I stood apart from the others, calm and collected, an island in a sea of emotional chaos. "Who called this in?" the older officer asked, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. Frank, seizing the opportunity to reassert some semblance of authority, puffed out his chest. "I did, officer. I'm the owner of this venue. This woman has disrupted a wedding, caused a massive disturbance, and is threatening my business." He gestured wildly at me. I held up a hand, a quiet, almost dismissive gesture. "Officers, if you'll allow me, I'll explain. I'm Mrs. Evans. This is my daughter, Sarah. I was paying for this entire wedding, a gift to my daughter.
I even spent 6 months making her a custom-designed wedding dress. I pointed to the tattered remnants on the floor. Moments ago, she had a tantrum. A very public, very unhinged tantrum, and she destroyed the dress. I've since canceled all the contracts for the venue, the catering, the band, everything. The wedding is off. My voice was calm and steady, a stark contrast to Sarah's hysterical whimpering. The older officer's eyes flickered from the pile of fabric on the floor to Sarah's tear-stained face. He had seen it all before. The entitled, the spoiled, the ungrateful. His expression softened, just a fraction, when he looked at me. He saw not a crazed woman, but a mother who had reached her breaking point. "Is that true, ma'am?" the young female officer asked Sarah, her voice firm and professional. Sarah, her voice a thin, pathetic squeak, could only manage a few words. "She's lying. She's a terrible person. She's always hated me." She was still clinging to her version of reality, even as it was crumbling around her. "Do you have proof?" the older officer asked me. I smiled, a cold, hard, knowing smile. "I do. I have a detailed ledger of every single cent I've spent on my daughter for the last 20 years, and I have a lawyer who is at this very moment preparing a civil suit against her for the destruction of my property, not to mention the financial fallout from the cancellation of a 6-figure wedding." The officer's eyebrows shot up. They had come expecting a domestic dispute. They had stumbled into a very public, very expensive lawsuit. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. This was a silence of a truth that was undeniable, a truth that was backed up by numbers and legal threats. Michael, who had been standing on the sidelines, suddenly looked at Sarah with horrified understanding. He hadn't just been deceived, he had been a co-conspirator, even if an unwitting one. He had stood there and watched her treat me so horribly, never questioning why, never asking where all her money came from. He was just as guilty as she was, just in a different way. He had profited from her lies, and now he was going to suffer from the consequences. This was the climax. This was the moment where the power shifted completely. The police, the law, and the truth were all on my side. I was no longer the quiet, unassuming mother. I was a force of nature, a woman with a righteous fury that had been building for years. They thought this was the end of the story. They had no idea that the real drama, the one with the lasting consequences, was just beginning. They wouldn't want to miss what happened next, what I did that sealed her fate forever.
The older officer, his eyes as knowing as a man who had seen 1,000 family dramas play out, finally turned to Sarah. "Ma'am," he said, his voice firm but not unkind, "I'm going to have to ask you to calm down. We're not making an arrest right now, but we are going to file a report. And based on the evidence and your behavior, it's not going to look good for you." He gestured to the heap of fabric on the floor. "This is clearly a criminal matter, but it's also a civil one. Your mother has a right to press charges." Sarah's face, which had been contorted with rage, was now slack with a different kind of terror. The kind of terror that comes from a lifetime of never having to face the music, of suddenly realizing that the consequences you thought only applied to other people were now standing right in front of you. She looked at me, not with hatred, but with a dawning, terrible understanding. You can't," she whispered. "You're my mother. You wouldn't." I just looked at her, my face a blank slate. "Wouldn't I?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. This was it, the final act, the last chance for her to see me not as a doormat, but as a person. And her inability to comprehend that I was capable of this, capable of protecting myself, was all the proof I needed that our relationship was over. It wasn't just about money or a dress, it was about respect, something she had never shown me. Michael, who had been a silent, ghostly presence for the past 10 minutes, finally spoke. His voice was a thin, reedy thing, stripped of all its former confidence. "Sarah," he said, his eyes filled with a pain that was real and raw, "did you really tell me that you had a trust fund and that your parents were helping you a little?
but that you were mostly independent? Sarah's gaze flickered between me and him. She knew in that moment that she was losing him. The lie, the grand lie that had propped up her entire life, was now being torn to shreds by the one person whose opinion she actually cared about. She could have looked at me and said she was sorry. She could have looked at him and told the truth. But she didn't. She did what she always did. She lied. I don't know what she's talking about. She's just trying to turn you against me. Please, Michael, don't believe her. She's crazy. Michael just shook his head, a single, devastating motion. I don't think she is. And the words were a final, fatal blow to Sarah's perfect world. I think I need to go. I need to think. He looked at her, a profound disappointment in his eyes, and then he just walked away. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't look back. He just walked away from the woman he was supposed to marry, from the life he thought he was going to have. The sound of his footsteps receding down the hall was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Sarah's theatrical sobbing started again, but this time it was real. It was a cry of pure, unadulterated loss. She had lost her fiancé. She had lost her wedding. And in a moment of terrible clarity, she had to have realized that she had also lost me. I looked at the officers. I think you have all the information you need, I said, my voice as calm as a summer night. I'm going to take my leave. The report is all I need. She can deal with the rest. The older officer just nodded, his expression a quiet mixture of understanding and pity. He knew that the punishment Sarah was about to endure was far worse than anything the law could hand down. She was going to have to face herself, and that, I knew, was a far more terrifying prospect than any jail cell. I didn't say another word to Sarah. I didn't need to. The silence said everything. I just turned and walked away. I walked past the bewildered wedding staff, past the open door to the main hall where the silent, stunned guests were still seated. They looked at me as I passed, their faces a mixture of confusion and morbid curiosity. They had witnessed a spectacle, a drama that was far better than any show they had ever seen on television. The whispers started the moment I was out of earshot. The gossip would be relentless, of course, but I didn't care. The truth was out there, a beautiful and terrible thing, and it was no longer mine to bear alone. As I walked out into the crisp, cold evening air, I felt a sense of freedom I had never known. The weight I had been carrying for so long, the burden of a mother's unconditional love, was finally lifted. I had lost a daughter today, but I had gained myself. The old me, the woman who was a doormat, a silent martyr, was gone. In her place was a woman who had stood up for herself, who had fought back, and who had won. The victory was a bitter one, of course. My heart was still a raw, aching wound, but it was also a glorious one. I had chosen myself, and for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. I had a feeling they would all talk about this for years. The guests would tell the story of the wedding that was canceled by the mother of the bride. The wedding coordinator would tell her colleagues about the quiet woman who brought an entire wedding to a halt. Sarah would have to face the world, a world that now knew the truth about her. And Michael, well, Michael would have to find a way to live with the truth that had just shattered his world. They all thought they knew the whole story, but they had no idea that the real drama, the one that would unfold in the years to come, was just beginning. The moment I stepped out of the grand, gilded doors of the Belladonna Grande, the cold night air hit me with a jolt, a physical sensation of freedom. The sound of the street, the distant hum of traffic, was a symphony of normal life, a stark contrast to the dramatic theatrical silence I had left behind. I didn't look back. There was nothing to look at but a life I had finally decisively walked away from. I got into my car, a simple, sensible sedan that I owned outright, and drove away. The rearview mirrors showed the flashing lights of the police cruiser and the faint, chaotic scene in front of the venue. The memory was already starting to fade, replaced by a quiet, determined sense of self. Over the next few months, the inevitable happened. The gossip, as I had predicted,
was relentless. It spread through the community like a wildfire, fueled by the morbid fascination of 100 wedding guests and the staff who had witnessed the spectacular implosion. But the story they told was my story, the truth. And for the first time, I wasn't a silent victim. I was the heroine of my own tale, the woman who had finally stood up for herself. It was a strange, surreal sort of fame. I got texts and calls from distant relatives and old friends, people I hadn't heard from in years. They didn't offer pity, they offered respect. They saw me for the first time, not as Sarah's mother, but as a person, a strong, resilient woman who had finally had enough. As for Sarah, her world, built on a foundation of lies and entitlement, crumbled completely. Michael left her. He didn't just walk away, he cut all contact. He learned about the lavish expenses I had covered over the years, the way she had lived far beyond her means, and the true extent of her deceit. He was, to put it simply, horrified. A few weeks later, I heard through the grapevine that he had moved to another state, taking the pieces of his shattered future with him. He had been a casualty, but he had chosen his side and he had chosen wisely. I never heard from him again, and I didn't want to. Sarah, stripped of her fiancé and, more importantly, her financial safety net, was left to face the world on her own. I didn't press charges. It would have been a hassle, a long, drawn-out legal battle that would have done nothing but drain me of time and energy. The public humiliation, the loss of her fiancé, and the complete and total absence of my financial support were a far more fitting punishment. The kind of punishment a judge couldn't hand down. The kind of punishment a person has to live with every single day. The last I heard, she had to move out of her luxury apartment and get a job in a retail store to make ends meet. The irony was not lost on me. She, who had been so disdainful of my quiet, simple life, was now forced to live a version of it, a life of hard work and responsibility, a life she had never had to consider before. I, on the other hand, was finally living. I sold the big, expensive house that had been an albatross around my neck, a monument to a past that was no longer mine. I bought a small, cozy cottage by the sea, a place where I could watch the waves crash on the shore and feel the sun on my face. I took up painting again, a hobby I had abandoned years ago because I had been too busy taking care of everyone else. My life was simpler now, quieter, but it was also 1,000 times richer. I wasn't just living, I was thriving. I had found the inner peace that had eluded me for so long. I had not only achieved a moral victory, but also a victory of spirit and self. I often think about that night at the Belladonna Grande, the sound of the tearing fabric, the look on Sarah's face, the silence that followed. It was a moment of profound heartbreak, of course, but it was also a moment of immense clarity. It was the moment I stopped being a mother and started being a person. I had lost a daughter, but I had gained myself, and the peace that came with that was more valuable than any wedding dress, any house, or any amount of money. Sarah got what she deserved. I got what I needed. And in the end, that was all that truly mattered. They all thought they had seen the end of the story that night, but they had no idea. They had witnessed the drama, the spectacle, the glorious unraveling, but they hadn't seen the final, quiet act. They hadn't seen the woman who found her peace, who rebuilt her life from the ashes, and who, in the end, won the most important battle of all, the battle for her own soul. They missed the most important part of the story, the part where the old hag finally got to live.